All right, so let me get started. So the talk today is the internet before its time, the NABU network. So let me introduce myself. My name is Binkowski, and I used to work for NABU. As a matter of fact, I started when I was 18 years old, pretty much right out of high school, writing video games. It's pretty much the kind of dream job that any kid today would have, and it came out by pure luck. So what happened was that I was working for a computer camp in Ottawa, Canada, in 1982, and we wrote software so that we could teach kids basic. This was on we used Commodore PETs as mostly as the platform, and that was what the schools were using at the time. And we wrote a whole pile of basic lessons and that kind of stuff. So we did our computer camp, and the summer ended, and some representatives from NABU were interested in our software because they were creating this new thing called NABU, which is, in a nutshell, we were going to distribute software via cable in 1982. So, and the really cool part is we developed the technology to do that. So I came in when the content was being developed. So what actually happened is, that gets me here, is there was an event where a whole pile of NABUs were found in a barn. What happened was these were part of Tribune Cable, and we had a prototype site set up in Alexandria, Virginia. And at that site, we had probably about 3,000 NABUs, some floppy drives, and so on. But when NABU folded in 1986, they were just left there, and somebody sold them as just as an asset. And they were sold on eBay as project boxes because they're very solid boxes. So this is a NABU PC right here, and we'll get to exactly how it sort of ended up. This is Dave's that he brought. I actually packed one in a very large suitcase and accessories and I came up with a 75-pound suitcase, so I couldn't fly here. So I'm really glad that Dave brought his. So moving on. And then what happened is that this got a lot of activity where people were interested in NABU and they started posting videos. And Adrian Black, for instance, posted a video about, I've got this box, don't know what to do with it. So, and then other people started to get it. So the gentleman to the right of me there is DJ Schurz. Now he is the son of one of the founders, Ron Schurz. So I knew of the name, and I saw that he was working on the internet adapter. He was doing YouTube videos. You can look up just look up NABU on eBay, and you'll find on YouTube, and you'll find tons of videos, and him and me as well. But he started building an adapter, and he couldn't make it work. But the difference is that I used to work for NABU all the way to the very end, and I had a development system, and I had most of the software sitting in floppy disks and on hard drives that were 40 years old, literally at the bottom of my basement, like on the floor, stacked up. I could stack these 6 high and so on. So there was, that's what I had. So I sent him a note on LinkedIn, and I said, I couldn't directly connect with him because of the way LinkedIn works, and I said, so I just sent him a note that said, if you connect with me, then I'll make all your NABU dreams come true, and we did. So this is what the NABU looks like. As you can see, this is his, exactly. It has a great box, it has a great keyboard, but it wasn't designed to be a personal computer, even though right at the side there, you'll see it says NABU personal computer. Why do we call it a NABU personal computer? Because the IBM PC came out just as we did at the same time, and they made the term very, very popular. And so we called ourselves a NABU PC, which is also the NPC. So after that, we started working together, and we created a site, and he created the NABU RetroNet site, and I created the forums so that people could discuss all of it. And there's a lot of activity of people that bought these project boxes from eBay. Now, they were selling them on eBay for $69 US originally. Fully intact, fully working, fully boxed, and in plastic from 1982. So people were buying them to build other PCs, but now that software started to appear via me, people were actually finding uses for it. So what we did was, so let's talk about the NABU just for a minute, and the company. So the company NABU was founded in Ottawa, Canada, and it was originally called NABU Manufacturing Corp. It was made up of 5 companies. It was just an amalgamation. A company called Andicom, which built the computers, a company called Computer Innovations, which was really a computer store, equivalent of Computerland at the time, in Canada. Bruce Instruments, and what they did is they made cable boxes, like switch boxes and pay TV boxes for the upcoming pay TV networks like HBO and that kind of stuff. That's what they were doing. So they had a lot of knowledge of radio and RF and how everything worked and how to use discrete components to make that all active. There was a company called Mobius Software, and they were brought in to make content. And they were mostly brought in to make business content, not necessarily games or entertainment software. And the last piece of the puzzle was a company called Volker Craig, and they made they were a terminal manufacturer. So that gave rise to making, Dave, where do you have the keyboard for that? Just want to pull it. So I just want to pop it out just for a moment, because I want to show you the keyboard. They made the best keyboard ever, literally. I still use this one, and I still love it, and everybody who's used it, it uses ALP key switches, so it's wonderful to have a terminal manufacturer make a keyboard, because everybody who saw the PC Junior keyboard realized that was made by committee. This was made by engineers, and it's solid. Like, a lot of people are dropping them and that kind of stuff. I'm not going to wreck it, Dave. Dave's is beautiful because mine are all dusty and full of cobwebs and spiders and that kind of stuff. This one is beautiful. But let me talk about some things about this machine here. And whoops. And before I get to that, actually, I want to talk about how it led up to it. The machine that you see on the bottom is the NAB 1100. It is also a Z80 machine. It runs at 4 megahertz. This was our original development machine. And this is actually one of the development machines that Santo Nakafura has, because you can see that little panel in front was basically the joystick ports and that kind of stuff. So we had that card on the right, that was our prototype NABU that went in this S100 machine. And that's where we wrote games. Now, we had 8-inch floppies that we wrote games, so we'd boot CPM from one and have all our stuff on one, and all of our software was on the other 8-inch floppy. And that made it really convenient, except these floppy drives really sucked. So daily, literally, it was scratching them. So we had to make backups literally every couple hours, and so that was getting kind of tedious. So what ended up happening is they made a development system using NABUs for us, and they put 2 NABUs together, and they put underneath it this thing here at the bottom, which was called the mass storage unit, from another computer that NABU built called the 1600. The NABU 1600 was an 8086 computer that had 512K of RAM and had terminals. It was designed as a business server kind of thing so that people could run several people on it and use it. But that thing on the bottom was our mass storage unit. It had a 10 meg hard disk, and it had a 1 meg floppy on it, an AT floppy, essentially. And we used that, and we put 2 NABUs together, and we connected them all together, and that became our development system for a long time. And what was really neat about that was we could use one NABU to pretend it was the cable, a cable adapter, and the other one to pretend to basically to test stuff. And we even had software that allowed us a special version of NABU called Super CPM that allowed us to do debugging across the wire. So how did NABU work? So what we did is we delivered software via cable. Simple, all right? We're doing that today. But we did it in 1982. Now, for all of us who have been around, obviously, since 1982, if you remember 1982, 300, 1200, if you were a business, a 2400 baud modem. This guy here goes at 6.3 megabits per second in 1982. So the way we did it is we broadcast it, every 10 megabytes every 13 seconds, over and over and over and over again. So the whole thing was one way, in the sense that all it did is kept on broadcasting the software, and the adapter, each adapter had its own PAL that identified what it was, and each customer could have their own custom software that they could get. So what ended up happening is that they would download the software they want. But we were building this not as a personal computer originally. We were building it as a home appliance. So originally the name was called Home NABU, or the Home Cable Computer. The NABU personal computer only came around because of the IBM PC. So this is where we are. But this diagram here describes how this whole thing works. So we have a head-end computer that has all our software on, and that was a Gould cell, a special high-speed modulator board, and this was basically transferring the cycle from memory to a signal. And then the cable had their own head end where they had their own signals, and then we combined them. So, well, they had the combiner essentially. And now that was part of the cable feed. In Ottawa, we operated on channel 31, which on cable at the time was the dirtiest channel that they had. In other words, it was all snowy and stuff like that. But we didn't care. We had error correction and that kind of stuff. We could use the dirtiest of channels, which was great. So we could use any part of the band that we wanted, and the cable companies were happy about that. In Ottawa, we had two cable companies. We had Ottawa Cablevision and Skyline Cablevision. Both of them were linked together to do this, to basically pass the signal to each other. It was a weird amount of cable cooperation that we hadn't seen before, just because they were really excited about this too. So in your home, this is exactly the kind of dimensions that would fit in your 1982 stereo cabinet. Perfectly fit there with the adapter on top of it. A lot of people put it on top of their computer, which was kind of to me, but inside of a stereo cabinet, it looks smart and stylish and that kind of stuff. Also, Dave didn't show you the key, but the keyboard cable is 30 feet long, which meant that this could stay in the stereo cabinet and this could sit on your coffee table. Now, the other thing that was kind of cool, and I can't really show it too easily here, but it had this thing called a TV NABU switch, and that just flipped between the TV signal and your NABU. And it also had a pause button. Every application gets paused by this. It doesn't matter what it is, operating system or no. So what people would do is that they would be watching hockey, and then the commercial break would happen. They would unpause their game, put on the TV NABU thing, play their game for 2 minutes. And some people had egg timers to count off the commercials. And then they would go pause, TV NABU again, and continue watching hockey. And that's exactly how a lot of people were using it at home. Now, so we broadcast this at 6.3 megabits per second. We actually did a really cool thing. We were at the NCTA show in Las Vegas in 1983, and we beamed that signal from Ottawa via satellite to Las Vegas, and then we had a demo there. And that really blew away the cable companies, because we were literally the first digital distribution. We were introducing them to video games on the cable network. They had dollar signs in their eyes, and things were kind of happening at that point for us. So this particular computer was the computer that we used as our head-end computer. It was a 32-bit thing called the Gould Cell, and it was, if you're familiar with VAXs at the time, we also had a VAX involved, but it wasn't fast enough to spit stuff from its memory to a wire. So the Gould Cell actually could do that really, really fast, so that's the reason it was chosen as the head-end computer. Plus, it was super reliable. It was up for days and days and days and days, unlike a VAX, which required rebooting periodically. So it made perfect sense as something that would sit in a cable office with nobody to run it, right? Just technicians to keep stuff running. So that was the VAX that we'd also have. So we had a VAX 11780, but that's where the software was mostly written before it was transferred to the Gould Cell. So I want to talk about the competition in 1982. In 1982, we had a Commodore PET, Apple II, TRS-80, didn't say it, Atari 800, which I really loved, but 8K. VIC-20, really loved too, but 5K of RAM. Commodore 64, now there was a worthy machine. Out of all the machines that came out, this came out actually in January 1983, so it was after the NABU, and that was the only one we said, ooh, that guy's a competitor. And then, of course, the venerable IBM PC, which did come out in 1981, but good God, it sucked in terms of graphics. So here we go. Here's the graphics. Commodore PET, Apple II, 4 colors. You get pink and green and blue and white and a number of other combinations. Oh, there's the TRS-80. That's wonderful too. That's Atari, I believe. VIC-20 and Commodore 64. It's starting to look really, really good. And I'm putting 2 at the bottom. There's our IBM PC putting up its famous 4-color set, the pink, blue, white, and black, and the black, yellow, orange, green. I have no idea why they picked the worst colors on the planet, like no designers. And this is the NABU graphics. This is just a catalog, a small smattering of the games that we had. The graphics were really, really, really good. They were MSX level graphics. As a matter of fact, the NABU is very, very close to the MSX machine. And in fact, we did start using the Z80, the TMS 9918, and the AY38910 sound chip that the MSX uses. While we are still using that same thing, our architecture is a little bit different internally. We have slots like the Apple, or expansion slots, as opposed to cartridge slots, which the MSX has. The MSX has 1 cartridge slot. The Atari had 2. So so that shows you the difference. Now, we also had, but remember, what we were trying to do was not introduce a new video game ecosystem. We were trying to go after a completely different market, a home market, something that families would use, something that families would buy for their kids because they thought it was good for them. And to that end, we got, there's a NABU again, and I'm just was going through the keyboard. We had NABU marketing, we marketed to cable companies, we marketed to schools and education, and we marketed to consumers directly. We had a three-pronged approach to the thing. Now, the cable companies, as it turned out, were the worst of problems, which we didn't realize, because when we went to shows, everybody loved it, right? But then what happened was, they didn't really love, they actually wanted all the money too. So they wanted us to do it all for them for free, and they keep all the money. That's really pretty much what the deal was. So they're the gatekeepers. Now, I put up this because Tom Wheeler was FCC chairman during the Obama era, but he was also president of NABU in the US at the time. And he was the one that came, and if you actually read this particular article, he talks that he was with NABU, and he was really, really ticked at cable companies acting like gatekeepers, lords over their lands, literally over the airwaves, or the cable waves. And it really, really irked him, and it was one of the reasons that NABU folded. Not all of the reasons, though. So I just wanted to demo a little bit, but first, before we start with Dave, because, oh, question, yes?
So what does the name NABU actually mean?
The NABU is actually from a Babylonian god that apparently is the god of messaging and information, and that's why they took it. So, but then there was a retconned acronym that was made: Natural Access to Bidirectional Utilities. The original NABU wasn't supposed to be one way, but as I mentioned before, cable companies sucked. In order to get it two-way, we needed them to upgrade so that they could receive a signal as well as broadcast a signal. That turned out to be a lot harder than we thought. So we never got the bidirectional aspect of it going in 1982, 1986, but we did get it going recently. So I'm going to show a little bit about that, and I'm just going to start. Now, the nice thing about the NABU as well is that while there's boxes exist, and there's 2,500 in existence, there's a little bit more. I have like another 9 of them at home. And some of them came to me because other people said, I have this in my basement, do you want it? And I say, sure, and then it became part of my basement instead. But because there's 2,500 around, that's a lot for people to play with. But other people have actually, what has happened in the community is, because of all this activity, and because I started releasing all of the software, people made, Brian Johnson specifically, he made an emulator for the PC, which I'm going to use. So I'm going to mix the use of, right here I have the NABU PC adapter. And this one here, so this is going to emulate the cable for us. This is going to be the head end. And in fact, it can be used two ways. It can be used over TCP/IP, in other words, locally if you want, or over RS-422. And there's a little RS-422 connector that plugs it directly into the chip over here. Now, one of the pieces of NABU that made it really, really fast was it has a super high-speed serial chip on it. If anybody who's dealt with the Commodore 64 has groaned about the floppy drives giving you like 4K a second. Maybe, is it even that much? But it's really, really slow. This is 110 kilobits per second, which meant that even though we couldn't grab it at 6.3 megabits, we could grab it a K at a time. The adapter had a K buffer, and it would pull in packets, but they were all staggered around the cycles so that this guy could run at its full 110 kilobits per second, because we couldn't bring it down to the Z80 that fast. But that high-speed interface gave us a lot of flexibility. That was our binary part. It went back and forth. A bidirectional part. So let me just demo what's going on here. I have a couple of things going. I brought up a MAME emulator here. So there's a MAME emulator for NABU that Brian Johnson wrote, and is available at gtamp.com compiled, but Bri John has a GitHub, which I can get the links from if you want them. But you can download all of this stuff and play with it. And there's a lot of software available. I've been recovering titles from the hard drives, and from floppy drives, and it's been tedious because floppy drives, the oxides are deteriorating quickly, the drives aren't working as well, so it's so frustrating that I can only do it for a couple hours before putting it aside saying this is just too difficult. I'm not as good a retroer, I'm more of an accidental retroer than everybody else is. Not so good with hardware, I'm great with software. So I'm just going to bring up something here. So we have, this is let's just have it boot from scratch for a second. I'll just close this for a sec. Just to show you how the Nabu boots. There we go. So this is the emulator running. Will you get the sound off that? Hope. Well, let's just see. I can hear it a little bit.
Please wait.
Yes. So that's essentially it booted really, really fast. The please wait, so the computer really just has a boot ROM. It literally has no software besides saying, get me the first packet from the cable. That's literally what it has. There are other boot ROMs for floppy, and you can choose to boot from floppy or choose to boot from the adapter if you wish. But let's just take a look at the Nabu cycles for a second. And this one here I want to show first, just because it shows the menu as it was in 1983, and you can see the evolution. We rebuilt the cycle every night. In other words, whenever we had updates to games, we rebuilt them. We found bugs, we rebuilt it. We did this literally every night because there was a lot of software that was on the cable, and we were writing as fast as we could. We put it up as fast as we could. We had a QA department, but we'd find bugs after the fact. And here's the best part. We could fix it. If you committed your game to ROM or to a floppy drive and you sent it off to a distributor, it is done, right? In 1982, the odds that you would get an update was super, super, super low. I don't think anybody did. I think Broderbund, if you wrote to them and complained about something, they might send you a new copy and that kind of stuff at the time. But in our case, we just fixed it. People would report bugs and we fixed them. So this is what the menu looked like. And we did not call things games or apps or other weird stuff. We called them like movies. We called them titles. We were trying to marry the video environment to the video game environment, unlike the video game industry, which was just going off of its own and making video games. So we built it to make it friendly, and we would change the menu. That little graphic at the top was just a graphic that was promoting Kitty Park, which was one of the games that was there. And they weren't there with any context. You would just see little graphics that were from other games in there at the top, and that's the way we do it, and we change them every night. So we had, for instance, we had their whole network guide, and we would have things like the network news. I'm not sure if this is here. Oh, so I got to reboot this one again because I don't have this one. Just a sec. We're not going to do the network guide because it's not on this cycle. And let me start it again. So that's the way it booted. Essentially, it's going through its power on self-test right there, checking the graphics and so on. And then there's a little tone you would hear. There's a rising tone. I don't know if we can make it really loud. Can you, Dave? But the tone was really important. So you'd hear something go woo, 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 woo. And every time there was a rise in pitch, you were getting 1K. So it was a super good diagnostic thing. So it was really, really interesting. Like if you had really bad cable, when people, so they would bring it out and they would demo to people. They would plug it into their houses and that kind of stuff. And it would go woo, 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 woo. And they would say, oh, you have terrible cable, sir? Because even though, and you would see that they were, something was split off 5 times, there was grounding problems and that kind of stuff. And we say, well, maybe you should fix the cable a bit and then this will work. And your channels will also be a lot clearer than they are. So that's the way that cycle was. And in my case, I had written a bunch of games for Nabu when I started in 1982. I was really lucky to start with writing, we all mentored off of an older developer. So we were all, and I mentored with Ken Shimizu, and he was writing tennis at the time, our tennis game, but we both worked on the roulette game together, which it was really, really cool because I thought it was my first game, that's really lame, but they said, no, we want gambling games. Trust me, we want gambling games because people like gambling games. So the first thing I did was a roulette game with Ken, and it was super popular, and I couldn't believe it. So I said, wow, I should expand my mind and work on gambling games as well because they seem to be very, very popular in the industry. But let's get something that will load. So when I made the, oh, go ahead, you have a question?
Yes. Did you have any games that included online multiplayer?
No. However, we were working on it before we folded. We also had a serial card, and we also had, which we could hook up a modem to. And we also had, so I would put 2 serial cards in the machine. One, I would run a terminal off as my development system, so I'd have it 80 columns, so I wouldn't be running off a TV. And the other one I would be using as a modem. And the modem, what I was using it for later on was for getting content from Tribune Cable. Tribune Entertainment in Chicago was building content, and they needed somewhere to put it. All they were doing was putting it in papers. So it was like Siskel and Ebert at the movies and stuff like that. And they were generating it, and they wanted to explore other mediums. So they were really, really excited about Nabu. And in fact, they wanted to do a rollout in Chicago. But we had only manufactured 30,000 in the prototype stage. And so that we didn't actually have them. If we would have released in Chicago, we would have required 100,000 of them, or maybe 200,000 of them. And we didn't have that. So we elected, Tribune Cable was also in Alexandria, Virginia, which was a suburb of Washington, D.C., but it's not that big. At the time, it was 150,000 people, which was perfect for those 3,000 that we sent there that were later found in a barn. So, when I started working on Pac-Man, I was just trying to make a generic chomper game, a maze chomper at the time, because I didn't, in my wildest dreams, I never figured they would get the rights to it. But at some point, somebody saw my game, which definitely looked a heck of a lot like Pac-Man when I was doing it, one of the marketing guys, and said, we're going to go for the rights, and went and contacted Namco, and guess what? We got the rights to it. So Nabu paid $1.5 million right off the bat, and plus royalties, to have Pac-Man, Dig Dug, and Galaxian on the cycle. And we used it to advertise, and it made a huge difference in terms of getting people on board. So with Pac-Man game, and I'll show you, I'm going to load her up. I spent a lot of time on this because I knew Pac-Man like the back of my hand. I could play for 150,000 points easily at the time. So I did everything to make it look exactly like the arcade game that I could. Now, there's also an MSX version, and you'll see, if you compare the Nabu Pac-Man to the MSX version, our graphics are just a little bit better. I went for putting whites of the eyes and that kind of stuff. And I just spent a lot of time polishing, trying to get the strategy of the ghosts in it so that you could use the same strategy in the arcade on mine. Now, I have a smash one because arcade monitors are in portrait mode, so I had to squish mine. So let's take a quick peek at what that looks like. But it is Pac-Man through and through. If you've ever seen the Atari 2600 Pac-Man, yes, I can't use these keys though. So, oh, I don't have a joystick. Well, we can do it on the regular one. But the idea is it worked really, really well, and everybody really loved it. And in fact, as I said, if you looked at the beginning, if you looked at the beginning of the game, we generated content in several languages. So a lot of the stuff was written in Z80 assembler, any of the action games and that kind of stuff. Any of the MSX games usually came to us as MSX source code when we were doing shimming, which was taking an MSX game and turning it into a Nabu game. But we also had several standards going on when we were doing games, and that meant that every game had to have online help. So there's an actual help key, and it tells you how to play. I think the page keys do. There we go. Yes, the page keys work through from here, and it just has, every application does this, where we provided help and so on. But so I wrote that in Z80, but there were a lot of applications that we wrote in Logo, the teaching language from MIT. MIT made a spectacular version with Logo for us. We sent them one of those Nabu 1100s. They gave us back a binary on floppy. It worked perfectly. We put it up on the cycle, boom. No debugging at all. They were quality class characters, and they were excellent to deal with. And a lot of games, I'm just going to, actually, so I'm going to load a different one. And now I showed you that menu, but I also want to show you in January, I recovered a whole pile off of a floppy disk, and off a hard disk, and the hard disk had no bad sectors on it when I pulled everything off. So I got everything off of it. I shipped it off to somebody else for more research. Dead. So it did its. So if you take a look, if you notice, the menu suddenly got a little bit better. The font got a little bit better. It got a little bit colorful. I thought that I kind of liked the overhead view, but it was starting to look like a TV box that you would see in the hotel room. We were aiming for that. We were trying to marry video technology to computer technology. The fact that we could flip from the TV and so on made it easy for us to do that, but we also had some plans with our expansion slots to control the TVs directly, to do an infrared module to be like a universal remote and tell VCRs to turn on and that kind of stuff from our menu. So that was one of the things that was on the board that never got done. But we had a huge educational, the huge educational component, partially provided by MIT with logo, but we even put, let me find that. And we did like literally tons of games. So what we did, remember I talked about marketing, we talked to cable companies, and we talked about schools as well. NABU appeared, we went and we made tons of educational software. They brought us in from the computer camp to make educational software. I ended up writing video games, but there was still an educational department. And we just made simple stuff so that schools could use it and they could, basically, they were just educational things. So what schools started incorporating NABU into their programs, what we would do is we would set up a lab with like a dozen of them in them. They would get one cable drop. There was their network, which was, their $50 a month or whatever it was. And then they would have 12 NABUs. We gave them one with a printer, and all of them had floppy drives, so the kids could save their work. And then when they took their work, they could bring it over to the printer and they could print it out. The schools were building a curriculum around NABU at the time, and they were excited to do so because, well, we were giving them the computers for free. Like they were essentially using them for nothing. And it was something really interesting. Now, the trick was, we were smart like Apple. If you remember, Apple, the only reason that Apple is super huge now is that they were super huge in the 80s with Apple IIs in schools. And as everybody grew up, they loved their Apples, and they bought Apple because they thought quality, I love these guys, Apple logo, and they're stuck on it. And then Apple's great sort of reinvention sort of came about because they did the educational thing. We knew that back then. We did the same thing. And in fact, it was working really, really, really well until it was all gone. Okay? So I'm going to run out of time, and I wanted to do a demo a ton more, so I could easily use up 2 hours here. So, but I wanted to leave a little bit more room for questions so that I can sort of show you all kinds of different things. We have over about 150 apps. As I said, I could spend all day here showing you all of the different things that we did and why we did them, and talk about all kinds of anecdotes about how the development went for them, because we had a lot of fun doing them. The company was very vibrant and very young. While we had a bunch of older engineers, and they worked on the hardware, they were almost separate from us. So the people that were doing content were literally aged from 16 to 24. So, and besides the managers. So that worked really, really well because we pumped out content. We were there 16 hours a day, and we were pumping out content, literally several games a month between us. Yes, you have a question?
Were there any third parties that were
Yes.
for y'all?
This one here is by Symbol Software. There was a company, so we would contract with other companies to make software. But we also, at the time that the MSX popped into gear, so when the MSX came out at the end of 1983-ish, around the same time, and that's when I met that wonderful dude named Kei Nishi. He's part of the MSX community. He was like the founder. He was literally the Steve Jobs of MSX. Really, really cool rock star kind of guy, super long hair, and just most interesting guy to talk to. He brought us a Famicom, and he brought us a prototype MSX, which I still have. And he gave it, and what we did is that he opened the doors to Konami, which we got like things like Hyper Olympics and all of their. Konami had a great suite of games, but they dealt with us mostly because of Kei Nishi. My boss met Bill Gates, and we showed him the cable distribution scheme. At the time, Gates was stuck on CDs, right? He'd seen CDs. They were just sort of appeared as music things in 1982. right? And he wanted them to be the distribution medium. So my boss said, my boss's name was John Short, they went to Japan and they met with Kei Nishi and Bill Gates, and Bill Gates said, this is the stupidest idea I ever heard. Why? Because it was going to, just because it was going to compete with CDs, it was going to blow away CDs. If you're getting your software at 6.3 megabits per second, even the CDs are slow by comparison, right? Sure, they have a ton of information, but we had infinite information, infinite bandwidth. We could pick many channels. We could put them on different channels. We could pick the channel that we broadcast on, and that made it very powerful. And he recognized that, but he didn't want it to interfere with the CD business. So he says the worst thing ever. Yes?
Okay, so this is a push system, and you said that all the content basically cycles every 13 seconds?
Yes.
Okay.
So well,
Isn't that therefore a limit to how much content there can be?
no. That was just a number that we picked because we thought that that was a good number for buffering inside the machine, basically 10 megabits, 10 megabytes. I mean, it's a 32-bit machine at the time, but buffering that in memory, that's 10 megabytes. So really what we were more, the limitation was the amount of memory that we could buy to use at that one time. I think that the Gould cell had something like a meg of RAM. So it was really low amount, but they had to stagger it, stream it very, very fast. And this was since their I/O was so fast. As I mentioned before, the VAX was too slow to do that. It couldn't buffer. But if we had a huge memory buffer, then theoretically the cycle could be as long as we wanted to. We didn't actually use up that whole 10 megabytes, by the way. What we did is we staggered stuff around the cycle several times. So the main menu, it would only take like 3 seconds to pop up. And the reason is because, or 3 seconds to start loading, because it was there like 4 times in the cycle. So it was there lots, because people were always loading the menu, right? But other ones, and popular ones, might be there twice. Pac-Man was there for a long time, was there twice, just to make it load twice as fast, right? So, and that we could do little tricks like that. And we were trying little tricks like that, which was kind of fun to work with. So there was no limitation at 10 megabytes. It was just happened to be a number we checked, just like 640K for DOS way back when, right? It was a reasonable number, knowing full well we could make it as much as we wanted. And we could do it on multiple channels if we added multiple computers. So literally we could have, we even said, we have infinite bandwidth. And we used to use that term when we were talking about how much can your floppy hold? We have infinite bandwidth. We can give you as fast as we can stream it, right? If the computers could support video at the time, which they didn't, but we had plans to have them. There were streaming chips coming out at the time. We were planning to do on-demand video through the NABU. Essentially just another interface card that was controlled by the NABU, just using it as the controller, but a high-speed stream would be done with it. And that would have been another nice thing that we never got to. I'm about 40 minutes in. Does anybody else have any questions as well?
So I know to kind of elaborate on, I know I mentioned online multiplayer, so it sounded like it was just kind of limited to the city that you were in. You could only play against people who were around you. Is that true, or was it anywhere else?
No, as far as multiplayer goes, here's what happened. I'm going to talk about the decline of NABU just for a moment, just so that you can see what happened. In 1983, 1984, we were going full blast. NABU had 800 people, of which a few hundred were in computer innovations with the sales thing. So let's not include them in development. Maybe 150 people were working on NABU between the computer and the content. We had one specific investor named Robert Compo. He built most of Ottawa, the downtown. And he was also the main investor in NABU. He threw $150 million into NABU. In 1982, that's quite the chunk of change. Even in Canadian dollars at the time. So, but then his company, which was a real estate company, if you remember in 1985, even in the States, a huge real estate crash happened. Boom, interest rates went to 20%. Real estate, everybody, just like the recent crash, people were unloading their things, and he was a real estate company. And his company, literally, $4 billion company, went boom, just overnight was pretty much disappeared. Since we had an on-demand loan with them, which was one of their assets, they called the note, which at the time was like for 30 million or something like that, we were done. So what happened was we had 2 months to come up with more investors. And if you've ever played the VC game, 2 months is too short a period of time to get more venture capitalists. So what they did is they downsized NABU. I got to stay as part of the new company, which was only 35 people. And we kept on producing content, lots of it. And even with those 35 people, we were buying content still and so on. So it still looked like everything was running full blast. The idea was to get some headroom so we could deal with VCs. If we didn't have a running system, we had nothing to demo. The game was over. So we built demos and that kind of stuff so that we could show VCs and that kind of stuff. And we found one that was really interested. The company was RCA. Hooray, we said, RCA, right? Went all the way up to the board of directors. They loved it. We worked with them. We built the proposal and that kind of stuff. Got to the CEO. He said, I don't think this is going to go anywhere. His company also didn't go anywhere shortly thereafter. So it didn't matter that much. RCA now is just a brand, right? And who knows who owns it? China, I'm not sure. Do you know?
No. Well, no, I was going to say, wasn't that right before they did the RCA Selective Vision video disc?
Yes, as a matter of fact, that's true. And that may have been one of the reasons. They were distributing their own stuff on video discs. That may have been it. But all I heard is that it got to the chairman of the board, literally a board meeting, and he says, I don't see this going anywhere. And that's where it all ended. So we kept NABU going to try after that RCA thing. And so from 1986, I was still there right to about a month before it ended, mostly because John Kelly, the founder, was paying my salary out of his own pocket. And I couldn't bear that to happen anymore. By that time, I was a fairly good programmer, and I was in super high demand. And while I wasn't getting paid a lot with NABU, I wanted to go to the bitter end, but I couldn't quite make it. About a month later, it folded in June 1986. And I was super sad about that, but I wasn't there. I was in Toronto at the time. I'd taken a new position. But we still kept in touch. I still had people I was talking to for eons afterwards. And I just wanted to bring those up because I brought. So, for instance, I've been meeting with everybody. This is one of the wonderful things about the retro thing is now I'm getting to meet all the people that I used to work with. So the guy, Eric Antle, he was the VP of engineering, also one of the founders. He gave me a couple NABU PCs, and he told me so many really cool things that I've written down. And once again, I could spend another hour talking about them. But some really cool details, which I'll give you. We sold the technology to ASCII Microsoft, which was the MSX promoter in Japan, for $100K. US, or Canadian, which was probably about 70K US at the time. So all of it, we sold the technology. They built their own NABU PC, which was black and it had a kanji keyboard, and it was really, really cool. I saw one, Keinichi brought one and he showed it to me. It was basically this, except all black, not the kind of chocolatey gray that it is there. So this is what's kind of neat because I'm talking to them a lot. And so like the guy in the middle picture, with the beard is John Short. He was my boss in the games department. He was also the director of content development. I became the director of content development when he left. Donna Frum, to his immediate right, she did NABU Basic and the documentation and an application called Seasonal Gardening. And guess what? They're married. So clearly NABU had an effect on their relationship. To the immediate right of her is my wife, Lisa. She met me just slightly after I worked for NABU, about 2 years afterwards, but there was still, when she came around my house, there was still like 5 of them around, so she was very familiar with what they were. In the bottom right picture is Tim Ranger wrote. Tim Ranger was one of the game developers with me. He wrote Laser Attack, Crisscross, and with Qbert with me. And Qbert was literally the fastest game we ever wrote. We did that within probably about 6 weeks, which was an absolute record for 2 people writing one tier 1 game, literally by reverse engineering. We had 0 code when we started. We went to the arcade, we taped the game, we literally said, who plays Qbert here? We said, here's a roll of quarters. Start playing. And we had a video camera with the blessing of the arcade manager because they thought it was just interesting. It caused interest, right? So, and he played it, we taped it, we had 2 hours of footage, we used that to build the game. It was perfect. It was very, very, very similar to the actual arcade game. Yes?
I did have a question. It had pretty wide bandwidth, and you were talking about infinite bandwidth. I was just wondering if you ever did anything or planning to do anything with Laserdisc.
At the time, Laserdisc was coming out, so it was like, what we were looking at was building a control that would control anything using the infrared. Like, we were thinking of all-in-one, and because an all-in-one infrared, because we could update things, we could keep on adding new codes, right? So we could make a universal remote, and that's what the thing was. But one really good use of the cycle, the infinite content. If you remember, which I'll give you two, there were, floppy drives were small, so if you got a game, you maybe had 150K of game, maybe. So if your game was like a game like Wizardry, for people who played Wizardry on the Apple II, use the floppy like crazy because it kept all its data on the game, and the game, very little of the game in memory, and you played from there. In our case, since we had access to all these things, and we could load them as if they were files from a floppy disk. To us, they resembled the same thing. So what we could do is we had a game called Manager's Baseball, which I haven't been able to recover yet, but I have pieces of it, which is so maddening, because it used up 6 code segments and 50 data segments. At the time, it was the entire roster. Basically, the idea behind Manager's Baseball was rotisserie baseball. We built rotisserie baseball in 1982 on this machine. But you could pick any player from 1984, American League or National League, to be on your dream team. And then you played them against somebody else's dream team that they made.
It was fantasy baseball.
It was fantasy baseball. But that was a really good use of, because we could blow out everybody on the market. There was literally a meg of data. But if you said, like, you wanted to pick a player from some specific team, then it would load that segment, you could pick that player, and then they became part of your team. And then you would say, well, I want to pick so-and-so from the Braves. And then we would do that. And that looked really, really, really cool, because you could generate your roster. This was the only example that you absolutely needed the floppy drive to play. But people who play fantasy baseball, they're serious characters. We had about 100 people that would literally be, the game was so complicated, it had many books, right? And people would be like wanting to strangle us sometimes because their teams lost because of some bug in the game and that kind of stuff. But that was an example of using tons of data, a meg of data that was available to an 8-bit computer, just broadcast, right? So you could pick your team, save them on floppy, you could print them out if you wanted, and they started leagues. Leagues were already starting, and those guys were, renting. They were full-on customers. These were adults. They were getting the floppy drive. So let me dive back a bit for a subscription thing. A Nabu, go ahead.
Real quick, Dave, do you have a Nabu that we can set up in space?
Yeah, we've got-
It's right here.
Okay. After this over, I have a space table. We'll set one up, and if you want to sit there and demo more, since you have more.
Absolutely, because I know I'm running out of time. As I said, I can
just
talk
wanted to mention
forever.
it So people can know they can come over and talk to you.
Sure. But I'll talk about some other people. These are other guys that I've talked to. So Mike Slynn, he was one of the, he was the guy that made the original Nabu prototype board. Warren Belkin, he made that original main menu and that Starfield menu. He was making a space game at the time, and that's why that Starfield comes out. He was making a game called Star Quest, but he got sent over to do the main menu. He never went back. Ed Myers was one of the marketing people here in Canada and the States, and he was the one that did a lot of the deals for us. Bob McNally was there to the last day. He was the director of operations, and I worked with him lots when it was Nabu, but he was the one that sort of collected and closed up the shop and turned off the lights when Nabu went out. Eric Mezdag was an engineer. He made the game Macbeth. He wrote it in Pascal. All of the games in Nabu were written in different languages, not just Z80, but we used Pascal, we used C, we used that really weird language from Digital Research, PLC, PL1, essentially PLM, that's the one. That was done with several games. And of course, Bill Bourne did mostly the keyboard, so he did a lot of the keyboard stuff. And John and Donna Short were other people that I've talked to. So I didn't want to go too far because I have a very long presentation that could go 2 hours. So, but we'll stop here mostly because I think we're at the end of good time. So I really want to thank everybody for coming. Those are really good questions, guys. If you guys want anything more information, thanks a lot. What's that?
We'll set you up so you can show them.
Thanks a lot. If anybody wants to chat with me, I'm going to be here all weekend. So if you manage to see me around and you want to ask anything about Nabu, or you're interested in any decals and that kind of stuff, I have these guys that I'm giving out for people just that want souvenirs.